Well, good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Matt Coy, and I am privileged to share a little bit of my story with you this morning. I'm on staff here at Calvary as an assistant in the worship department, and I direct the choir and orchestra here. But I actually grew up in Calvary Church, so this is home to me. Also, I'm currently pursuing my Master of Divinity degree from Western Theological Seminary. I am just finishing up my third year of school out of 5, so I'm now only 2 years away from being ordained, which is pretty cool. Thanks. However, just 5 years ago, my life looked very different. I was on staff here, and I was a young single kid in his late 20s when we called Ron Sitlow to be our next senior pastor. Now, I had actually met Ron before. Back when he was the young adult pastor over at Faith Dyer, I would occasionally help out and lead worship with a friend on Thursday evenings at their Catalyst services. Now, I didn't know Ron very well, but I knew he was a really gifted preacher who could occasionally be funny, too. But I thought to myself, now here's a guy I could be friends with. Shortly after our Easter weekend in 2014, Ron and I went out for coffee. And in the course of our conversation, he asked me a life-changing question. He asked me, have you ever considered becoming a pastor? Now, I was pretty flattered that my new boss saw this potential in me, but I was also pretty intimidated because I knew there were going to be significant hurdles for me to overcome if I was going to ever pursue this path. A few weeks later, Ron and I met up again and went out for lunch. He asked me, have you considered what we talked about last time? I had, and I was terrified. I knew I had to be honest with Ron. So I said, you know what? I could never be a pastor. You see, I never graduated college. That's right, the talented kid who was beloved by the church was a college dropout. I even had the dubious distinction of squandering a full tuition scholarship. You see, during that time, I had suffered from depression and anxiety. I never sought the help that I needed. And ever since then, I just lived with the shame of my failure weighing me down. And I never thought that I could amount to anything more than what I already was. As I poured out my heart and spilled my guts to Ron, I expected him to say, yeah, I guess you're right. That's too bad that you can't do that. But he had a very different response. He just looked at me and said, that's it? I'm pretty sure I've committed crimes and they still let me be a pastor. And in that moment, I had a new sense of hope. So for the next several months, Ron and I continued to meet, and I continued to work through some of the shame from my past. And then after a full year of dragging my heels, in fall of 2015, I went back to school. I started off at Joliet Junior College, taking some prerequisites that I needed. And then in 2016, I officially started my seminary journey at Western Theological Seminary. Now, at this point, I didn't even know if I could do this. I hadn't even written a paper in 10 years. And I still had that voice in the back of my head asking me, could I do this? But I knew I had to take this leap of faith, partly because Ron said that if I didn't take the leap of faith, he'd push me over the edge. So I was scared, but I did it. I took the leap. And then an amazing thing happened. I didn't crash and burn. I actually learned how to fly. You see, I learned that I didn't have the strength myself for such a big undertaking. But as I learned to rely on God more and more, through His power and His resources, I was able to succeed. As I began to see God's faithfulness in sustaining me, I was able to make another significant change in my life. Last year, I stepped down from full-time employment here as the Media and Technology Coordinator so that I could focus on my schooling and have more opportunities for ministry. It was a significant financial risk for us, but God has proven Himself faithful. As I've continued in the process of seminary, I have been so thankful for Ron's friendship. He continually encourages me, he challenges me, and yes, we've even butted heads a few times. But it's not only through his one-on-one meetings that I've been impacted by him. You see, I've learned how to be a leader just from observing Ron in his everyday life. I see someone who's not just a gifted teacher, but I see someone who wakes up early to pray, somebody who stays late after a meeting to stack chairs, and somebody who's not afraid to admit when he's made mistakes. You see, it's not always about what we say, it's the way we live our life that leaves a lasting impact on people as well. Now, I couldn't tell my story without mentioning another significant person. 2.5 years ago, I married my wife, Brittany. And most of you don't know Brittany because she's never here on Sundays. But she has a really good excuse. You see, she is the pastor of First Lutheran and St. Philip churches in Blue Island. Now, I never thought that I'd become a pastor, but I never thought that I would marry a pastor. But it's been so cool to see how God brought us together because we both have the same passion and the same heartbeat to serve the church. And I don't think it was by coincidence that we met shortly after I decided to take this leap of faith and enter seminary. Now, I don't know what God has planned for us in ministry in the future. I don't know where we're going to end up in 2 years once I graduate. But I know that from my time here, from being at Calvary and my friendship with Ron, it has all had a lasting impact on me. Wherever I go, I'm going to carry the DNA of Calvary with me. Because you see, I long to be the leader of a community that welcomes everybody, no matter how bad they screwed up. I long to be part of a community where people are radically pursuing Jesus and being his disciples. And more than anything, I long to invest in people the way that Ron and so many of you have invested in me. You see, God has a way of multiplying our efforts, and I just can't wait to see how big of an impact this story has. As I finish up the last few years of school, I ask for your continued prayers and your continued support. And to God be all the increase, and to God be all the glory. Thank you.